Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. What's the deal with consciousness and the soul? Talk about a tough topic. This is about as tough as it gets. Um, so you could ask yourself, what is the soul? Now, philosophers have debated the idea of the soul for millennium. And I'm just going to give you what I think the soul is. Now, the position of the Catholic Church is that the soul is the spiritual principle in the man. So it's the spiritual principle in man. It is the innermost aspect of man which is of greatest value to him. Another way of describing what the soul is it's the intellect and the will. But what we ordinarily refer to as the intellect and the will is, we call this consciousness and our freedom of choice. So what is the soul? The soul is essentially consciousness. The church says that the human body is animated by a spiritual soul. So there is a duality between body and soul. Body and soul duality. So why is there this duality? Well, if you think about it, it's pretty simple. The soul is consciousness, but the body is that which allows consciousness to get around, to move around, to go places, to do things. Consciousness is, you think of it as, our thoughts and feelings. And you can have those thoughts and feelings and not move anywhere. But if you want to go somewhere and do something, you better have a body. Right? So that's why there's this duality between body and soul. Essentially, the soul is the driver of the car, and the car is the body, which allows the soul to get around. So the two are intricately tied together. The soul needs the body in order to get around. And it's, designed to get around. And the body needs a driver to drive it around. So it's designed to have something drive it around. So the two are intimately connected, body and soul. Now, animals have souls, and so do humans, which basically just means animals have consciousness, and so do humans. But there's a difference when it comes to the immortality of one's soul. Animals do not have immortal souls. Only humans do. So, whereas an animal's soul perishes with it when it dies, when its body dies, a human soul does not perish when the human dies. A human soul is immortal. So a human soul is immortal. Now, why would it be immortal? Well, first off, Jesus tells us that the soul is immortal. So we have essentially a revelation from the Son of God himself that our souls are immortal. As well as, Jesus is also God, so God is telling us our souls are immortal. But why would God do this? And, the answer is because God is sharing with humans one of his characteristics. And a loving, perfect God would do that very thing. And one of God's characteristics is that he's singular and immortal. So there's only one God. And that's because God is uncaused. And a system of having more than one God wouldn't work, because each God could undo the other God. And then neither of them would be God, because God is that being that is in control of what is created, what is made real, and what is not made real out of the infinite number of possibilities for material reality. So you can only have one God. Because God is uncaused, God cannot create another God. Nor can God destroy himself, because you can't create that which is uncaused. Nor can you destroy that which is uncaused. So God is singular. And God, of course, is also immortal. God has always been. God is outside of time and space-time. So God is sharing with us his quality of singularity and immortality. So when he creates a human soul, he is making that soul unique and singular in all of material creation. And he's also making that soul immortal. So God sustains that soul forever. God has the power to create, destroy, maintain, sustain reality for us forever. So God can create a soul and maintain that soul forever, and make that soul immortal. So that's why God gives us souls. He's creating a unique you, and you need the soul to be immortal in order for you to continue to exist after your body dies. And of course, on Judgment Day, that immortal soul is reunited with a resurrected body. Not the deceased human body, but a resurrected body. So soul is reunited with a body. And they become a complete thing once again. Because again, the soul is the driver of the car. So the resurrected body is the car, and the immortal soul now has something to drive around it. Uh, so, in fact, if the immortal soul, if you didn't have an immortal soul and the body died, then your soul would die, just like the soul of an animal, and then you couldn't be immortal because your soul has perished. So God preserves your soul. God preserves your consciousness even after you die in the form of an immortal soul, which later gets joined with a resurrected body. And God can preserve your consciousness in another reality. God can create anything logically possible, including other realities, and can create whatever laws of physics he wants in order to maintain that consciousness that is your immortal soul in a different reality. And God can sustain that for as long as he wants. And in this case, he sustains it forever. If God were to stop sustaining that immortal soul, that would be considered annihilation. God can do that, but God promises not to do that. So God won't do it because God's perfectly good and God sticks to his promises. So he sustains that immortal soul in another reality using different laws of physics where your consciousness resides until you are resurrected and joined with the resurrected body. And then the decision is made whether you go to heaven or to hell. So that's why you have an immortal soul. And that's what an immortal soul is. Now, it makes perfect sense because consciousness can be created by matter and energy. It's created by our brains. But it can also be sustained in another reality with different laws of physics that God himself creates. So there can be a simple transition from death to an afterlife in the form of an immortal soul, just through a transition to a different reality that God sustains. So God can, when you are born, imbibe you with an immortal soul, which is your consciousness in your brain. But it's also been basically stamped by God as an immortal consciousness, as opposed to an immortal consciousness like you might find in an animal. That's the uniqueness of you that God has given you. God is unique. There's only one God. God is unique. You can't create another God. And God is giving you the same characteristics. There's only one you, and you can't create another you because God is giving you an immortal consciousness, an immortal soul. And that means there's only going to be one of you. You're unique, and that's it. That's a great gift of God. So, okay. On to the much tougher question. So, the soul essentially is your consciousness, your immortal consciousness, because God is giving you the gift of immortality and singularity, uniqueness in all of material creation. That's why he gives you an immortal soul, and he doesn't give an immortal soul to an animal. So the next question and the harder question is, well, what is consciousness? Consciousness is like the soul, another subject that has been debated for millennia. Philosophers have debated this question forever. Scientists are trying to answer this question as we speak, and no one has a clear understanding of what consciousness is. Maybe someday they will. Right now, they don't. So, what I'm going to give you is my best guess at what consciousness is. Now, it would seem to me that consciousness resides in the brain. You have an extremely complex organ up there called the brain. And it defies logic or reasoning to think that consciousness does not reside in the brain, because why else would you even have a brain? It's so unbelievably complicated, brain structure and how the brain works. I mean, it has to be because that's where the center of consciousness is. Because consciousness itself is unbelievably complicated and difficult to understand. So, of course it's in the brain. I mean, why else would you have such a complicated organ if not to house consciousness? Why would it be there? It's obvious. It's obvious that consciousness resides in the brain. So, what is the brain there for? What does it do? Now, the brain is what leads the body, much like the soul drives the car. The brain leads the body. The brain is the terminal where our nerve endings stop. So, our nerves and our senses are sending communications to the brain. Why is that? All right, why? Because that's where consciousness is. That's where the most important decisions are being made. Now, there is a subconscious too. So your brain is capable of making decisions based on sensory input that you're not even aware of. That's called the subconscious. But when you talk about consciousness and the intellect and the will, you're not talking about the subconscious. You're talking about the conscious. You're talking about the master command center, inside the brain. That's deciding the big questions for the being. Consciousness is where the being, the self, resides, and where decisions are made regarding the navigation of that being through its environment. Where does it go? Where does it move? What does it do? What does it look for? As it moves through an environment, whatever its environment happens to be. But that's what consciousness is there for. It's to allow the body to understand where it is, what's around it, so that it can make important decisions about where it should be going or what it should be doing. These are very important decisions because if you make the wrong decision, you'll die. So consciousness is making the most important decisions that a body can make. Now, subconscious will be making other decisions that the conscious doesn't have to be that involved with. Because the consciousness it's the command center. It's making the big decisions. It's deciding where the body goes and what it does. Now, in order for the body to make these sorts of decisions, it needs sensory input. So the body has all sorts of senses. And these senses are electrochemical signals that are carried through nerves. And a lot of those signals end up in the brain. And you need those signals in order for the consciousness, the self, to know where it is, what it's doing, what its condition is. And there's a lot of senses. We're most familiar with the 5 senses, which is sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But there are other senses too. There's a sense of position in space. Your brain understands where your body is in space. There's senses regarding balance that detect gravity or acceleration. You have temperature senses that can tell whether something's cold or whether something's hot. You have senses for pain. You have senses for itch. Itch is a sense. You have organic senses like hunger and thirst. Tell you when you're hungry or you're thirsty. And you have motion senses that tell you about movement of your body, or whether your body is stretching or there's a vibration. So there are many, many, many senses in the human body that the body uses to decide on what its condition is at any given moment, so that it knows the proper thing to do. Now, there are all of these senses, but there's also the sense of self. Sense of self. And what this is a sense that senses the other senses. Okay? So the self is consciousness. It's our sense that we exist, that there is a me, not just a body with limbs and appendages, but a me. That's a sense of me, a sense of self. And my sense of self, I am the commander of the most important decisions my body will make. And in order to do that, I need to sense what the other senses are sensing. So some of your senses may be telling your subconscious this or that, but your sense of self is telling you what this sense is sensing. So your sense of self is really, it's a spatial sense of self. And it's like a display monitor for everything that's going on in your body that's important. So it's a display monitor with a spatial sense. That's what the self is. And the various senses are displayed to this self And depending on what the sense is, the display is different. So if the sense is sight, you will see sight, or light, or color, or brightness, or contrast, or figures, or boundaries. If the sense is hearing, you will hear words, noises, anything that you can hear. Same thing with the other senses, smelling and taste and touch. Those are also things that appear on the display monitor in your sense of self. And the sense of self has all these things displayed to it. And that's how it determines what decisions to make. So it has all the input it needs to make decisions. And then based on that input, it then makes nerve responses, which tell the body what to do. So it's the command center. The sense of self is the command center. It has its own display monitor. All right. For instance, we could talk about the color orange. All right, orange. Color orange is a color of light, a color of brightness that appears on the display monitor. It's one of the things that the display monitor can show, but you have subconscious senses that also get input from the eye and will react based on that input reflexively. But they don't see orange. This sort of colors, light, sound, smells, these things are unique to the sense of self. Your subconscious can process the sensory input without having to actually see orange, for instance. Let's say, orange is the color of fire. Your subconscious could see or could know that there was a fire. But it doesn't have to visually see orange in order to know that it's there, that the fire is there. So it senses it using the same sensory input, but in a different way. It doesn't create orange. Whereas the sense of self actually creates orange, this color. Now, if you think about the brain, let's say, the color orange. You have your eyes open. Let's say you're looking at an orange. You see orange. And then close your eyes. What happened to the orange? Right? It's gone. And you open your eyes up, and there it is again. What this tells you is that your sense of self, the color orange, is a temporary state. It can disappear simply by closing your eyes and opening them up. It comes back. It's just a temporary state. So, wherever orange is located inside your brain, it's a temporary structure. It's a temporary state. It can't be something permanent, like, permanent fixation of cells, or maybe the movement of cells, for instance. It's too slow. That would be too slow or permanent to possibly explain how orange could appear and disappear simply based on you opening and closing your eyes. So orange has to be an electrical structure. The brain uses electricity, a form of electricity, chemoelectrical nerves, because electricity is very, very, very fast. It also can be very temporary. You can create electrical structures made of electricity, and you can turn them off and turn them on. And electricity is very, very small compared to molecules or cells. And consequently, if you can use electricity to encode data, you can encode to a much, much, much greater density than you possibly could with something larger like cells or molecules. And if you think about computers, this is why electrical circuits in computers use electricity. This is why computers use electricity, because electricity is very, very tiny and it can pack a lot of information in. That's why circuit boards are made to use electricity. And just like a computer, you turn electricity on, the computer can generate electrical structures, temporary electrical structures, inside the computer chips that it can manipulate, and manipulate very, very quickly. But if you turn the electricity off, bam, the structure's gone. But like a computer, there's hardware too. So you turn the electricity back on, and the hardware comes back on and creates the software again, this electrical structure, temporary electrical structure that's created by hardware. So the brain is, very good analogy for the brain is a computer. Very, very good. Now, there's many ways in which they're not the same. The brain is an organic structure, and no one has ever shown that you can create consciousness with a computer. They're the hardware is completely different. But it's a good analogy, nonetheless. But it's only an analogy. So, in all likelihood, the sense of self uses electrical structures, temporary electrical structures, but electrical structures to create the images that are on the display monitor within the spatial sense of self that we call consciousness. So, in all likelihood, the sense of self is an electrical structure created by the electrochemical processes of the brain and brain circuitry. And there's trillions and trillions of cells in the brain, so it can create extremely complicated electrical structures that are also very dense and not nearly as big as you might think they'd have to be. And in fact, it would have to be something that is extremely small and yet also extremely dense in order to fit inside our relatively small brains. You can't have a gigantic brain. An animal can't exist with such a gigantic brain. It would require way too many resources, and it simply wouldn't survive. So you need something like an electrical circuitry, essentially, to even have a human being that can have consciousness at such a small size. And consciousness is not unique among humans. I mean, they're small animals that also have consciousness. So, electricity is really the only thing that explains it. It's got to be an electrical structure, consciousness. It has to be. What else is there? Or an electrochemical structure in the brain. There's nothing else in the brain that it could be. So it has to be that. And it's the perfect candidate for it because electricity is so tiny and so dense and so versatile, and it's also temporary. It can be turned on and off. There's almost no question that it has to be electrical structures. That's what consciousness is. So then you move on to the really tough question, which is, what is consciousness? It's in the brain, It's probably some sort of electrical structure. But what is it? Um, and the answer is it's consciousness is it's a derivative of material reality. If you think about consciousness and the things that are in it, that are contained in it, they could be. These are just examples. What's in consciousness? Ideas, math, colors, sharp boundaries, whether those are visual boundaries or other sorts of boundaries. A thing is here and not there within your spatial sense of self. Tastes, smells, sounds, etc. That's what's contained in the consciousness. Now, these things don't exist in material reality. And that's the crux of the problem. How could these things which don't exist in material reality exist at all? How is it possible? If you look at an atom or a molecule, or you look at something under a microscope, right? And you think about physics or quantum mechanics, these things don't exist in those things. Orange, right? Orange doesn't exist in material reality. And by orange, I mean the color orange. It doesn't exist in material reality. You can't find it anywhere. A molecule is an orange, or an atom is an orange. Somebody will say, well, what's orange? Some science teacher will say, well, it's a wavelength of light, right? It's a wavelength of light. Or it's actually a mixture of different wavelengths of different lights, right? So it's a mixture of different wavelengths of light. But no, it's not. This isn't orange. This is a wavelength of light. The eye sends a sensory input to the brain that says, oh, we've encountered these wavelengths of light. And then the brain interprets that as orange. But the brain's interpretation is not what the thing is. There's no orange in these wavelengths of light. Orange doesn't exist. It only exists in the brain. So, these things of consciousness, the things that are in consciousness, these are things that only exist in a consciousness. And a consciousness only exists in a brain. So these are things that only exist inside a brain. They don't exist in material reality. And that's the great mystery. What are these things? And how could they exist at all? We know they exist because you can see the color orange in your brain. So it has to be real. But we also know you only see these things inside somebody's brain, which means they don't exist in material reality. So there's a great mystery, right? Where's color? What are colors? Where do they exist? They're not in material reality, so how can they be real? And yet they are real because we see them. We know they're real. So what they are is a derivative of material reality. A derivative of material reality. They have their source in material reality. But they are not themselves part of material reality. They're a derivative of material reality. So, what's a derivative of material reality? Well, here's an example. All right, take out my wallet and I'll pull out $50 bill. See that? $50 bill. Now, in material reality, what is this? It's a piece of paper with printing on it. That's all it is. Material reality says this is a piece of paper with printing on it. But you would tell me that it's more than that. It's a $50 bill. This is money. So you're subscribing to it a meaning beyond which material reality gives it. So you're saying, no, this is not just a piece of paper. This is money. And what is money? Money is an idea. It's an idea. So this is a derivative reality. Is money real? Sure. It's real because we all believe it's real. We all believe this has value. And that belief is what turns this into something more than just a piece of paper, but into an idea of value that you can use to exchange for goods and services. Because that's what everybody believes. So they act as if it's something which material reality doesn't support. Material reality says it's just a piece of paper. Because everybody believes it's more than that, we act as if it is more than that. It becomes a derivative reality, that of money, an idea of value. Well, you can say that now, this is an analogy, okay? It's not a perfect analogy. It's an analogy for what's going on in consciousness. Consciousness is a derivative reality created by electrochemical structures and circuits. And what these circuits do is they act as if something that is not materially real is materially real. So they act as if something is real, even though in material reality it's not there. But fast-moving, temporary electrochemical structures and circuits have the ability, in interacting with each other, to act as if something is real. And that's what consciousness is. It's a derivative reality where the material electrochemical circuits act as if something were real. And thus it creates a derivative reality. And because of that, that derivative reality becomes real. Not in the material sense that you can't find orange by looking under a microscope or dividing up molecules or atoms or whatever. You'll never find orange. But because the circuits in the brain act as if orange is a real thing, it becomes real. And that's the trick of the human brain and the creation of consciousness. It's the creation of derivative reality. Is derivative reality real? Yes, it is real. Is it real in the material world? No, it's not. But because the material world acts as if it is real, it becomes real. And consequently, all those things in consciousness which don't exist in material reality can become real. Because material reality acts as if it is real. So derivative reality it's real. It's a real reality. It's created by material reality and these electrochemical circuits acting as if it does exist with its characteristics in a very highly complicated brain circuitry. So things like color and ideas and mathematics and sights and smells and a sense of self and the spatial sense of self become real things. Because material reality acts as if they are real. So, material reality has itself the real material reality, the objective reality, but it also has the reality that it itself can create by acting as if this material reality exists. And it's not that consciousness is imaginary. It's not. It's real. But it's only real inside a brain that is capable of creating a derivative reality. And that's where, orange is real. It's a real color. But it's a derivative reality. It only exists in consciousness. But it's real nonetheless. Now you can see an orange in the color orange, and you know that orange is real, even though you can't find it in material reality. It is a real thing. But it's a derivative reality. So you're talking about a property of matter whereby matter can create derivative realities. So, when you're talking about consciousness and the body having to decide where it should go and what it should do, it's sensing the other senses. And it's creating this derivative reality, this spatial place of self, where it has this display monitor, where it has these derivative realities, which allow it to essentially map out its environment so that it can make reasoned and good choices about where it should go and what it should do in actual material reality. And it uses derivative realities to do that. Derivative realities are much simpler to handle and to understand and to focus on and to act on than an actual reality, which it's far too complicated for a brain to even comprehend all the information that's being thrown at it. So it has to use a derivative reality to make these essential decisions about what the body should do. Now, God is not a derivative reality. God exists in objective material reality. And on many videos, I've explained this to you. I've given you proofs of God's existence and why there must be a God. Those proofs are all based on material reality, not a derivative material reality. So God is not a derivative material reality. But human consciousness is. It is a derivative reality from material reality. Even though, you could say, well, God is an idea. And that's true. And a derivative reality would include any idea. That's true. But some ideas are real in material reality, and some ideas aren't real in material reality. So just because something that's true in material reality can be thought of as an idea, like the idea of God, doesn't mean that God is not a material reality and is only a derivative reality. Because remember, the derivative reality is trying to map out and simulate what's in the surroundings, in the material reality, in the surroundings of material reality in the environment for the organism. So it's using this derivative reality symbolically to represent actual material reality so that it can make good decisions on what it should do. Decisions that could determine whether it lives or dies. And that affects evolution. So the better an organism is able to survive based on derivative reality created in its mind, the more of an evolutionary advantage it's going to have. It's going to be much more. It's going to survive much better than an animal that doesn't have that. And consequently, that's why evolution creates the brain in derivative reality, because it's extremely useful in survival and in reproducing. Okay, so so there is this objective material reality that physicists study, made of mass and energy and gravity and space-time and various particles. But there's also a derivative reality that is consciousness, that minds create. Because the materials in the mind, the electrical circuits, act as if it is there. Consequently, it becomes. Once you understand that the ideas, colors, mathematics are derivative realities, in order for those things to exist, and they do exist, we know they do, there must be an objective material reality. Because you can't have a derivative reality if there's no objective material reality. So essentially, for instance, the color orange proves that there is an objective material reality, because you couldn't have orange as a derivative material reality if there wasn't an objective outside material reality that agrees that orange is a real thing, and subsequently orange exists. So that's a proof of the existence of objective reality. Orange does not exist in material reality. The color orange. But orange does exist in consciousness. Okay? So orange does exist in consciousness, or derivative reality. Therefore, there must be a material and derivative reality. A derivative reality relies on the existence of a source reality. Therefore, the source reality must exist. Okay? Therefore, the source reality must exist, i.e., objective material reality. So because orange exists, the color orange, because the color orange exists, then that means an objective material reality must exist. Because orange, the color orange, is a derivative of objective material reality. If objective material reality didn't exist, then the derivative couldn't exist either. So because the color orange exists, objective material reality must also exist. Okay. So, that's what I think about the soul and consciousness. Consciousness is a fascinating topic, but it's a derivative reality of material reality. And because we know consciousness exists, and the ideas that exist in consciousness, and the colors and sights and sounds, we know that there must be an objective material reality, a source reality, or those derivatives couldn't exist. And material reality and electrical circuits, electrochemical circuits in the brain have this incredible property that if they're set up right to act as if something exists, a derivative reality, then that derivative reality actually exists. And we know that because we can see the color orange. So we know the derivative reality must exist, even though you can't find orange anywhere in material reality. It doesn't exist. It only exists in the mind, but it does exist as a derivative reality. So this is a property of matter and energy, that it can create derivative realities in the correct setting of a human brain in an electrochemical circuitry process, where those circuits act as if a virtual reality is real. That can create a virtual reality, a derivative reality. Derivative realities are real, just like you can see the color orange. They are real. But they are created by material reality, where material reality acts as if they are real. There you go. There's the solution to the question of consciousness. The sense of self is what our souls are. It's what makes us unique in creation. And that sense of self is immortal because of God's gift to create an immortal sense of self. This derivative reality becomes immortal, or is immortal, when God creates a human being. And that's a gift of God. So I hope you like those explanations. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And maybe I'll address them in a future video or in the comments below. Please press the subscribe button and the like button. And you really ought to like what I just said, because it clears up a big mystery for you. All right. Take care.